So if you're looking to buy a fixed gear, you need to know that there's a lot more bad beginner fixed gears than there are good beginner fixed gears. I would say the bad bikes outnumber the good bikes probably 3 or 4 to 1. And there's two types of complete fixed gear bikes on the market. The first type is for normies. And when I say normies, I just mean people that aren't into cycling. Bikes that are for normies lure people into buying them because they look cool. They usually have a lot of loud, flashy colors. Yes, they look cool to the beginner's eye, but at the end of the day, they have subpar components, especially for the price that some of these bikes are charging, will be heavy and sluggish to ride, require a lot of maintenance and trips to the bike shop to make sure that you can even ride it, and will be a lot more expensive in the long run. The second type of complete fixed gear are enthusiast bikes. Enthusiast bikes, they may not have the flashiest components, they may not have the most color options for you and your unique personality, but they'll be reliable, they give you a lot of bike for your money, they'll be reasonably lightweight and fun and zippy to ride. So here's how to spot the beginner fixed gears for normies, the people that aren't into cycling and that don't do their research, that are usually a ripoff, versus the bikes that are for enthusiasts. The ones that are worth your money, will be fun to ride, and that you should probably buy if you're looking to buy fixed gear. Shout out to Wabi Cycles for sponsoring this video. In the event that you do actually get a bike through this video, be sure to do yourself a favor, hit the subscribe button so you could watch me and Wabi's video series 3 Minute Thursday, where we teach you how to get the most fun out of your bike in 180 seconds or less, and you could see that series by clicking the card above, or sticking around to the end of the video, and you could check out Wabi Cycles linked in the description. Of course, I'll have all the bikes that I mentioned in this video linked in the description, the ones that are worth your money anyway. It's important to know that Wabi does sponsor the channel. I do ride a Wabi myself, and I encourage you to do all your own research into all the bikes that we talk about here today, but I hope that the information that I'm giving you is still useful to you, even if this is sponsored. So here's how to spot the normie bikes. In other words, the bad beginner fixed gear bikes that you should 100% avoid. Bad beginner fixed gears really emphasize how the bike looks over how the bike rides. What people that aren't into cycling are looking for is just a bike that looks cool enough to buy. So a lot of bad beginner fixed gears will have the same traits. Like they'll emphasize a lot of color options over how the bike actually rides and what the parts are on the bike. They'll usually come with these colorful and heavy deep dish wheels that, again, look great to the beginner eye, but are really sluggish and not fun to ride. And when you're looking for information on these bikes' product pages, you're probably not going to find very much other than how many color options you have to give the illusion that you have a choice when you're buying one of these bikes. And bad beginners fixed gears tend to not have a lot of information because, number one, they're not really trying to sell these bikes to people that care about this information, and more information would just confuse their target market. And number two, they're trying to hide the fact that these bikes kind of suck for the price. Some immediate red flags that you look for when shopping for a beginner fixed gear is that the bike has no published weight for the complete bike. While weight isn't the end-all be-all determining factor, it is a good rule of thumb to use when you're looking at bikes, and usually lighter bikes tend to be higher quality. A good beginner complete fixed gear will weigh around 20 to say 22 pounds depending on what size you get. But bad beginner fixed gears tend to weigh around 25 pounds, and that is weight that you can feel with each pedal stroke, and it just makes it less fun to ride. That's why these bikes don't show the weight on their product page. This right here is my cousin's Pure Fix original series. She obviously bought it before consulting me, and this is their 47 centimeter model, the lightest, the smallest, and the lightest one in their size. I would think that even for an entry-level bike, a bike of 47 centimeters should weigh about maybe 18 pounds. So let's see how much this thing actually weighs. Keep in mind, this thing costs $600. 10.53 kilos, which is 23 pounds and 3 ounces. So this bike weighs about 5 pounds more than I would expect it to. So don't buy it, especially for $600. This thing should cost $200. That would be a fair price. Not trying to be mean, just calling it as I see it. Another huge red flag is that there's no geometry chart. The geometry chart shows you the dimensions of the tubing on the bike and the angles of the head tube and the C-tube. Although it sounds really nerdy, it is actually a super important piece of the puzzle when you're buying a bike, because fit is the #1 most important thing that determines whether you'll enjoy riding your bike or not. even just a few centimeters, a few millimeters in some cases, can be the difference between you actually wanting to go out and ride your bike because you're comfortable on it versus being in pain on your bike. And the geometry chart is key in finding the right sized bike for you. If there's no geometry chart, just don't buy it. Just don't. Save yourself the time and the money and the pain. Another red flag is when a company refers to the bikes as Fixies instead of fixed gears. Now, I made an entire video about what the heck a Fixie is and why experienced riders don't use the term Fixie and say fixed gear instead. Basically, all you need to know about the word Fixie is that it's a term that beginners mostly use, and companies will use that term to speak to beginners that don't know much about bikes to try to extract as much money from them as possible while giving them a crappy bike. Bad beginner fixed gear bikes also pretty much tend to look exactly the same when it comes to how they're put together. They'll be constructed out of high tensile steel, which is the cheapest material that you can make a bike out of. It's really heavy and it's really sluggish to ride. It's not fun. They'll also have sloppy welds because the companies making the frames only have so much time to spend putting together the tubing for each frame so that they can keep the cost as low as possible. And those deep dish wheels that look great to the beginner eye, they'll be around 40 or more millimeters deep. Again, super heavy and sluggish to ride, but look flashy and cool to trick a beginner into buying them. And they'll have loose ball bearing hubs, bottom brackets, and headsets, meaning that they'll just be more maintenance in the long run and won't run as smoothly the more you ride it. And these bikes will almost definitely be made in China. This is just a rule of thumb. There's great bikes made in China and there's really terrible bikes made in China. But the number of terrible bikes far outweighs the number of good bikes that are made in China. There's a lot of bad beginner fixed gears out there, from the State Core line at $400, the Pure Cycles at $600, geez, and the Mango at over $1,000. That is straight up robbery right there. All of these bikes should cost $200. I wouldn't spend a penny more than that, so you're better off just avoiding them. Good beginner fixed gear bikes, on the other hand, are kind of the exact opposite of bad beginner fixed gear bikes. Enthusiast bikes tend to look more understated because bike companies know that's what enthusiasts like. They know that if somebody wants to make their bike colorful and flashy, they'll do so themselves down the line with their own parts. There's also a huge emphasis on the bike's ride quality and the quality of components over how they look, although they do still look great, just in a more understated and calmer tone. And with enthusiast fixed gears, they will refer to their bikes as fixed gears or track bikes, and the term Fixie will likely be completely absent from the product page. And they'll also give you a lot of information on the bike, like the country of origin, the geometry chart, so you can actually buy a bike that is the right size for you and have fun riding it, and extensive specs sheets. Most beginner fixed gears are going to cost around $400 to $600 US, and that is when considering the ridiculous bike inflation that we're experiencing in the current year. When these companies are speccing their bikes, you can imagine a triangle that they're trying to balance, and bad beginner fixed gear bikes are trying to balance, does it look cool and does it come in a lot of colors, versus can I make it as cheaply as possible, versus can I sell it as expensive as possible. Whereas with good beginner fixed gear bikes, they're balancing a different set of ideals, if you would. They're trying to make a reliable bike at a reasonable cost that is also reasonably lightweight and fun to ride, because good beginner fixed gears are guided by a completely different set of principles. The choices that these companies make to build those bikes uphold those principles. For example, a lot of great beginner fixed gear bikes are going to be made out of double-butted chromoly steel. This is a huge step up from the straight gauge high tensile steel that most terrible beginner fixed gears are made out of. And depending on your price range, you can even get fancier steels like Reynolds 725, which is another big step up from just regular double-butted 4130 chromoly. Or you could even start getting into some reliable aluminum frames with carbon forks. And those aluminum bikes, again, they're going to be double-butted, meaning overall there's less material, it's going to be lighter, while still being just as strong. The welds will be really clean, consistent, and tidy, and for steel bikes, sometimes you can even get a lugged frame set for that extra level of craftsmanship. And on some aluminum bikes, you may even be able to get completely smooth welds. These bikes will mostly come spec'd with sealed bearing components, meaning that there'll be less maintenance in the long run and be incredibly smooth running for the duration that you have it. And they'll have a published weight of around 20 to 22 pounds depending on the size of bike that you get. A 5-pound difference compared to bad beginner fixed gears doesn't sound like a whole lot on paper, but it is a real big difference in the real world when you're feeling that 5-pound difference with each and every pedal stroke. Typically the rims will be 30 millimeters deep or less, again to keep the weight down but still keeping it plenty durable and reliable. And again, the country of origin is just a rule of thumb, but these bikes are generally made in Taiwan. There's both good bikes and terrible bikes made in Taiwan. But the number of good bikes far outweighs the number of bad bikes that are made in Taiwan. To make things easy for you, here are my recommendations for about every budget. At $500, there's the Kilo TT. At $600, there's the Kilo TT Pro. And then there's also the Fuji Feather, which at full MSRP is $720, which at that price, like, that's a ripoff. You can usually find it on sale though for around $400 to $500. The closer you get it to $400, the better. All of these bikes will be made out of double-bladed chromoly steel to keep the weight down, and will have lugged forks instead of unicrown forks. And they have a mix between reliable OEM components and basic entry-level brand name components. So with the Kilo TT versus the Kilo TT Pro, the Pro comes with a sealed bearing wheel set and a Sugino crankset, which is Japanese made, that looks a lot nicer and rides slightly nicer than the stock crankset. But the thing I really like about the Pro over the base Kilo TT is that it comes with a sealed bearing wheel set, meaning that it will run smoothly and maintenance free. There are a couple caveats though, like we said before, the Fuji Feather at full MSRP at $720. Don't buy that, try to get it on sale or get it used. Kilos are notorious for having weird tire clearance issues. Some can fit 23C tires just barely, and others can fit 32C tires comfortably. It's kind of hilarious how much variance there is. So if you're getting a Kilo TT and you're thinking you might want to try out some bigger tires down the line, just know you might not be able to. At $699, there's an aluminum bike with the State Black Label version 2, and this is my favorite aluminum bike that I've ever reviewed, and my number 2 favorite complete bike that I have reviewed. It's made out of 6061 aluminum, has a full carbon fork, and a tapered head tube for extra stiffness to make this thing a sprinting beast on the streets. Just know, State is notorious for having terrible quality control, so I recommend that if you're going to get a State bike, only get it from a bike shop and do not order one online, because even with the review unit that I got that they should have cherry-picked and made sure that it's completely good for thousands of people to see, they over-torqued the compression plug in the carbon fork by a lot, to the point where I said, I'm not gonna ride this thing. It's dangerous to ride this thing. You may have damaged the carbon. Please send me a new fork. And they did, probably because I'm a reviewer. That probably won't happen to you. And there was a metal burr that tinkled around the rear rim that was stuck inside, and it was mildly annoying. The Black Label is a great bike. Just get it from a shop though, so that the shop can sort out State's shitty quality control. Although this isn't exactly in the entry-level price range anymore, this is by far my favorite complete bike that I've ever reviewed, and I highly recommend that you at least consider this bike if you have a bigger budget to play with. And that is the Wabi Classic at $995 US. The Wabi Classic is made out of high-end Reynolds 725 steel. It makes the bike go, and it makes it but springy and lively to ride. It's a lot of fun. The Wabi Classic has the exact same tubing and geometry of the bike that I ride on a daily basis. This is firmly enthusiast grade stuff, and all of Wabi's components on their bikes are specifically and carefully chosen to be as light as possible, with also being as reliable as possible, while also giving you a lot of bike for your money. $995 for a complete bike, that may be too expensive, because if you're just trying out fixed gear, you may not know if you want to sink that much money into a bike. But to put it into perspective, for $200 more than the State Black Label, you're getting way more than $200 worth of upgrades. At my level of riding, I've been riding for 10 years, I ride like 20 to 30 miles a day, sometimes I do bike touring and ride 100 plus miles, I would be perfectly happy with a completely bone stock Wabi Classic. That is how good they are. But again, keep in mind, they do sponsor me. I have a couple of reviews on Wabis before they sponsored me, so I recommend you go check those out if you're interested in them, or go check around online and see what people are talking about them. And I guarantee you, it's going to be unanimously positive. Like, they're really good. So be careful out there. There's a lot of bikes that are trying to rip you off, but hopefully with this information, you can get a bike that is actually worth the money, actually fun to ride, and will actually last more than 6 months. A Fixie famous shoutouts to Brandon Black, David K, Gio Dezera, Julian Corona, Ryan Witt, Scott Palangi, and Zane Kolnik for helping to make these Fixie gear videos possible. Through the support on Patreon, I'm overexposed, but that's alright, because life is short, but don't make it shorter, so be sure to ride your bike every day to be reasonably dangerous.